All right, Brian, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Okay. Welcome to the May 1st, 2023 meeting of the CB6 Transportation Committee. My name is Brian Van Nieuwenhoven, and I am the chair of the committee. Tonight, we are joined by District Manager Jesus Perez and Community Coordinator Brian Lafferty. This meeting is called to order at 7:03 p.m. As a reminder, New York state law requires all community board members to have their cameras on and their first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. If your camera is not on and your name not properly displayed, you cannot count toward quorum. Members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If there is time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. We will need somebody to take minutes for tonight's meeting. If you can take minutes, please volunteer by raising your hand through Zoom. Anyone can do that. That would be great. I'll give one more second for extra volunteers. Gabe, it looks like it's you. Thank you. Gabe Terzo will take minutes. We'll now take attendance by roll call. Brian Lafferty, our new community coordinator, will conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Brian. Just one minute, please. Thank you. Committee members, I will call your name and you will unmute yourselves. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Majed Abdul Samad.
Present.
Thank you. Michael Devereaux.
Present.
Thank you. B. Disman.
Present.
Thank you. Jason Tromowitz.
Present.
Thank you. Matt Roberts.
Present.
Thank you. Larry Shire.
Present.
Thank you. Gabe Terzo.
Present.
Thank you. Brian Van Nieuwenhoven.
Present.
Thank you. Ronnie White. Ronnie White. I'm not hearing anything, so I'll move on. James Wilson.
Present.
Thank you. With 9 of 10 members present, we have quorum.
All right, thank you very much. So now we're moving on to the agenda portion of the meeting. We're just going to give them a quick second on that. Just one more second.
Apologies.
Now I have to exit full screen, which I have to do every time. I love Zoom. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and is reflected on the screen before you. There is no objection. We will adopt the agenda. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. And I will scout for objections. Anyone raising their hand? Seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes from the April 3rd meeting were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there is no objection, we will adopt the minutes as drafted. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the minutes, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Seeing no objections, the minutes from the April 3rd meeting are adopted. They will soon be available on the CB6 website. Jesus, you can stop the screen share now. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. Number 1, no one may speak until granted the floor. Number 2, committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. Number 3, the chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us of any technical difficulties you're having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. We're also going to make an exception tonight for this because we have someone presenting an amendment for a resolution and they want you guys to be able to read it, but they will also recite it out loud for the Zoom. Number 4. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself so that you can speak. Number 5, committee members are required by the state open meetings law to have their Zoom cameras on and your first and last name displayed during tonight's entire meeting, from call to order to adjournment. If you must step away from your computer briefly, you're required to leave your camera on. And now we're going to move on to committee business and restart the audio video. Jesus, that's all good? Great. Tonight's agenda, item number 1, discussion on the expansion of DOT summer streets in Manhattan Community District 6. So we have was a draft resolution submitted to the office about this? Just out of curiosity?
No.
That might be some confusion. We have some prior resolutions that we might be able to put up if we bring the Airtable up and look for summer streets. This is great practice, Brian Lafferty. That Airtable is pure digital gold.
Go to the website.
So while you guys are looking it up, from my memory, we have discussed this in the past and we have endorsed as a board the expansion of summer streets, suggesting to NYC DOT to look at other potential byways in the district for which they would close roads to traffic, allow the bikes and the walkers and the programming to expand onto it, and allow more space for people to spread out, because the core corridor along Park Avenue, which isn't even really in our district, am I correct? Only for a very small portion it is. These technical things. Anyway, the core corridor of summer streets on Park Avenue, it gets really crowded, and it's only existing every time for 3 Saturdays of August each year. So 3 Saturdays a year in August, only from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. And 1 p.m. is being really generous because they really start throwing people off the course at like 12:30, 12:45. So we think, based on prior discussions, that we would recommend that they expand upon this. We have put that out there. We even stated it as a revival because I believe the 1 year it didn't happen because of the pandemic. You know, it was outdoor. It was like so unsafe for us to be outdoors around one another. So let's see what this resolve. Expanded to 1 weekend day per week in July and August, which will balance the concerns of vehicle drivers and local businesses with residents and visitors, both pedestrians and cyclists. Scroll up a little bit because it names those other byways that we would like to link into that. East 16th and Irving Place to connect to Stuyvesant Square Park and Gramercy Square Park. East 20th and 21st Streets. East 35th or East 36th Street to connect to St. Barton's, FDR East 42nd Street ramp and East 48th Street ramp, northbound FDR Drive, other streets deemed appropriate by NYC DOT and city agencies. So we asked for a pretty broad and well thought selection of streets. Can anyone volunteer to tell me which of these streets were adopted by DOT in the last 2 summer streets? If anyone has a hand raised. Any volunteers to tell me how they expanded? Jason?
It has not been expanded.
It has not been expanded. And this is part of our process as a board, is that we look back at resolutions we've passed and we see how the city has met the requests or adapted to the situations. And in this case, this is another thing where we have asked DOT to make any sort of change, and we have not got, I don't even think we've been engaged on this. I don't think that we've set up a meeting with DOT to talk about which of these were viable, even on a board leadership or memorandum type discussion. We have certainly not discussed here at committee any proposals given back to us by DOT to see how this might be done. And I haven't, the only expansion I've heard of Summer Streets is that it has gone back over the Brooklyn Bridge or gone a little bit farther north on Park Avenue, which is outside of our district. So, it's not really our concern, but it has been, the program itself has been expanded a little bit, but it's not occurring on more days of the year. It hasn't expanded in our district, and its times that it is active has not been expanded either. So normally with a resolution like this, the request is still out there and we're discussing it. If there are any other ideas about expanding Summer Streets in our district in a way beyond what we have here, now is a good time for us to kind of bring that up. I will go with B, Majed, and Michael. You're up, B.
So thanks, Brian. So I actually thought this was a good resolution when we passed it by the full board. And in order to get an engagement by DOT and the appropriate stuff, would it not make sense, Brian, to reaffirm this and to ask for a dialogue to take place as opposed to just leave this resolution?
I think the idea is that we do want to continue the dialogue on this. I don't think we just pass this resolution again and be like, we're just shouting it louder. I don't think that that's ever been really our way of doing anything. But I do think that just in discussing this as a committee, I think that part of bringing this back up is to reaffirm that we want to continue our process with this and even solicit ideas for how we can get that ball rolling if we can. Majed, you're next.
So I'm just wondering, thinking out loud, would it make sense for us, or does anybody just on top of their head see a major reason why we should not ask for closure of the FDR itself, maybe the southbound within our district between 42nd and 14? This is something that other major American cities do, specifically Chicago with Bike the Drive. It does not add too much to the logistical needs, and it's from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. on a Saturday. It's really not going to disrupt traffic in the city. So I'm just wondering if this is on the table, or if it's a wild request for DOT.
So you make a good point. I should note that the reason why my predecessor researched this and came up with northbound FDR Drive is because there are a number of events in the city that I believe closed the northbound FDR Drive already to do similar like big events and whatnot. And that this was kind of our, this is a really easy win kind of thing. This is not unprecedented. You're already doing this 5-6 times a year. Why not do it 7, 8, 9? And so you are correct that the impact of even a half closure has already been measured to be acceptable enough for them to do it a number of times a year. And we wanted it expanded to this program. I guess it was asked in this particular way simply because this was something where it's already done in that manner, in that very specific manner of doing the northbound FDR Drive closure. Could it be both? I mean, I see it the same way that you just stated it. There's nobody making a mission critical trip that they absolutely have to be on the FDR from 96th Street southward on a Saturday morning during the hours of Summer Streets. And there are plenty of alternate routes and plenty of ways to deal with this. And the timing is really good for that kind of thing because it is low volume traffic and usually very high speed hours. But again, we just haven't gotten a response. We haven't had a dialogue. We haven't gotten anything in writing to say that this was being seriously considered. And every year we get like a surprise Summer Streets announcement, like sometime in the middle of the summer, telling us what we're going to get. So it seems very controlled about how this is being planned. Like we're not given any real input on this. This is just something that's being handed over with, little advance notice or planning. Another thing I would suggest, in case anybody is doing any advanced research on this, is that it's really a trick to kind of look up like what the process is to get in there to try to be like a vendor or a presenter along the route. It's not easy for a small nonprofit to get like a tent along the way because it starts looking like you have to make the same kind of presentation as a corporation that wants to do like a gigantic activation. Michael, you'll be next.
Thank you, Brian. Just a couple of things. One, I've seen this lawsuit, against the city and the open street plans. I guess groups of people representing people with disabilities are taking a little action against the city with these. I would just love to, keep that in mind. If there are any local disability groups that, we could kind of see or, ask if any of these plans would affect them. I know there's a lot of hospitals on the east side too. It's just an idea to keep in mind. The other thing is about the FDR Drive. If they're going to close that to bikes, the drive, I've been driving on it a lot lately, and it needs to be paved bad. There are real big potholes on it. It's just in bad shape. So I guess this is a sidebar that it would, I wonder what the paving schedule is for the FDR, and hopefully it's before the summer, they can close it for the bikes, but it's in rough condition right now.
Well, if it's that badly paved, maybe they could just close it. What I was thinking was, in terms of the accessibility lawsuit, it is just a claim against the city. It is a legal document filed. There is no legal impact of that at this time, and everybody is free to enter such a claim into court. It is, to my knowledge, that Summer Streets allows every part of the route to be fully accessible. There are a number of police officers stationed literally at every single intersection to open barricades and allow people through in case of emergency, in case of accessibility needs. I think that especially because pathways are open and streets are clear for anyone with an accessibility issue to get to where they need to get to, specifically if it's a half block on foot or something like that. I think it seems to be compliant with ADA law, and I don't see a particular problem with any of our subsequent resolutions into what we're providing in terms of accessibility with Summer Streets. And so as far as that other lawsuit goes, let's see where it goes. But at this time, I do not anticipate us needing to change the way we do business as a city as a result of that filing. Jason, you're next.
Yeah, so I've got a couple thoughts on this. So first off, I'm talking about the FDR. I support shutting down the FDR for this, but I do feel like the FDR is sort of less preferable than extending the time on Park Avenue or just generally making the expansion of Summer Streets, and that the FDR is very far over on the east side, obviously, and there's not a lot of public transit connections. Park Avenue really is like the center of the city, and I think it's much more accessible to people in general. So I think just like worth keeping in mind that like I support it, but it feels to me like very like secondary to the benefits of what we get with Summer Streets. I had a bit of a suggestion of how we could potentially address this, in that I believe when this resolution was passed, the city did not have its open streets program, which has come a long way, and I think proven the success of this type of concept of shutting down streets at a regular basis and opening them up to pedestrians. There's a number of like really long corridors in the city that have either now permanently are shut down for traffic or are shut down most days. A couple come to mind in Brooklyn, and you've got can't remember the main one in Queens that has been very successful. So I think there is maybe an opportunity to reintroduce a resolution calling on that, like this, given the success that we've seen elsewhere in the city, it makes sense to see an expansion of this program. One other thought is how we might be able to take advantage of the city's open streets program to have something similar, but maybe on a smaller basis. Could we as a board propose an open streets plan?
It is creative thinking, but I'm going to say we don't have the capacity to be a primary sponsor of such a thing. We'll discuss more offline, but I would also say it's not the imagined situation of who a sponsor was going to be. Like, a community board is not a group in the neighborhood, but is actually like a part of the city. And so, like, it's not really part of our mission to be doing street and transportation programming like that in any sort of administrative capacity. We are totally free to suggest to any number of partners in the district or residents to gather and take advantage of city policy to do these kind of things, but I don't think we could lead the way. I don't think we could really provide resources on it. I think we're at also a limit of capacity in the office with these kind of things, at least for the short term. So I think that our better options certainly lie elsewhere if it's not strictly impossible.
One more thing to call out quickly. Brian, you mentioned that like the prolific amount of NYPD officers that are on hand to support this event. I think there's probably that is one of the arguments just to not expand the program, is given the high cost of manpower required to run the program. And I think what we've done with open streets elsewhere has proven that we do not need the entire NYPD force to be on call that day in order to support something, and perhaps calling that out.
I have a somewhat subtle opinion on that, in the sense that I don't think that the city is responsible. I don't think it's it's not good for the city to just put up a bunch of barricades and leave them unattended. I also don't think it's particularly efficient to have the particular type of staffing that we've seen in past weekends. I think that there are different combinations of plans that may represent appealing options. One is potentially more non-uniformed officers as part of the staffing mix, less people who are on patrol or getting emergency responder overtime, essentially. There could be more employees, there could be seasonal employees, there could be all kinds of potential combinations, and still having NYPD as a very substantial partner in the mix with a very substantial manpower presence. There are options. What we're doing right now is probably the most expensive option in terms of staffing. And we could talk to DOT about how we feel about that, but I also feel like it does start to like kind of, get off of our particular purview with this to talk about like staffing mix at something like Summer Streets. Like, we're here to kind of ask for it, and the city should find a way to put it together. We can also raise this to the attention of our local council members so that they could talk about the deployment of the event, including which streets are closed and who's staffing it and what the costs are, and maybe they can exert some activism on it. Matt, you are next.
Thanks, Brian. A couple of things. So, I mean, I think we would all love the expansion of Summer Streets, but I think maybe we're going about this the wrong way. I mean, the way I see it, it's more of a budgeting issue. I'm sure DOT would love to expand the program, but unless their budget increases, I just don't see how that's going to be feasible. I mean, they're already telling us, time after time that they can't accommodate certain projects because of funding. So, I mean, I think that there needs to be a concerted effort from the city council and the mayor's office to really increase the funding for if it's going to happen. Sending a resolution to DOT is one thing, but I think that we need to do more behind the scenes to kind of get the ball rolling on any future expansion. And number two, the NYPD thing. I mean, so there's there's a lot of volunteers are along the route with stop signs and whatnot. So I mean, anytime you have a street closure, you really need the police department there. I mean, you see a good example would be a lot of the street festivals where they just put up barricades and don't attend them. A lot of times, especially when there's no vendors in certain spaces, you see cars traveling down there when the streets are closed and people are not aware that there should be any vehicles traveling. So I do think you need police presence is really already, what it is. So obviously the budget for them is one thing, and you already have people complaining about the massive amount of overtime already. So I think there's some budgeting issues we have to tackle here first.
Yeah, and as I was mentioning earlier, I agree that it just cannot be a bunch of unmanned barriers. It gets back to what we were just talking about with the open streets and the ADA lawsuit that appeared. The lawsuit may not be accurately representing the situation, with all due fairness, but at the same time, you can't have a thing where you have a bunch of volunteers say they're going to do something and then not be at those barricades if people need to get through. If it's part of the bargain that access needs to be maintained, then that actually does require staffing. I know there's a lot of people who think that it looks like a big waste to have people standing around at the edge of the barricades and charging the city for time, but I think that's part of the deal with summer streets, and I think it's a really, really necessary thing. There are a lot of drivers who tried to go around police posted barricades, sometimes even with the police there. B, you'll go next. We'll move on from debate on this because we can bring this up next month if we want to continue advancing it, but I will call on B, Majed, and Michael next, and that's it.
So Brian, I'm looking at the fact that today is May 1st, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about a program that we actually would have liked it in July. But I think the whole question, and you started with this, is transparency and engaging in a conversation as to what is really happening. There has to be a plan already of what's going to take place. And how do we, and I agree with the comment that we need to get to our city council people, but we also need to start engaging in the conversation, Brian. So I look at that as our next step. We could talk about a resolution, but that's not the issue. The issue is really to get to the heart and find out what is taking place this year.
And just to be somewhat clear about the way I see how this process would go, we don't need an additional resolution if we agree that what we have on the record is sufficient. I can empower the chair of our board who can speak for us to make those kind of contacts and to recommend to him how to do this in a way that brings this to the attention of more people and gets more people involved in the mix. One of the things that we've noted about the community board and sort of using our power is that the chair is empowered to represent the board and do this kind of speaking for us. The individual committee chairs are not. The chair of the board has a lot on their plate, plus isn't the chair of any individual committee at any given time. And the most knowledge of these issues resides in the committee chairs. So this is a somewhat strange structural problem that exists for a good reason, but we're trying to address that, through executive committee and, the bylaws stuff that we just went through. But I think that, our chair is absolutely aware of this split, of the kind of difficulty it is to have only one person who can speak for all of us, and yet not really have the knowledge of the 8 or 9 of us who are in charge of the committees, and for us to do more work to empower the board to somehow get the word out about these kind of things more efficiently.
So
Majed,
Brian,
you're next.
one comment.
Oh, okay.
Did we just see
Go
the
ahead.
date of that letter that went out with the resolution? I thought it was on top.
Yeah, the day after the meeting of March 2021.
21. Okay, thank you.
So they've had it stewing for a while. Majed, you're next.
So very briefly, I mean, 2 years later after this was made, I think by the time Summer Streets happened this year, the promenade on the east side between 53rd and 60th would be open, if I'm not mistaken. If that's the case, would it not be open by then?
No, went on a tour of it. They're not going to have the landscaping done in time, in part because there's been some construction on one final section of it that also won't be done in time. So they're looking at like a November, December opening.
Got it. Okay.
Michael, got you. And we'll move on.
Thank you, Brian. First, this letter was when Gail was the borough president, right? Mark wasn't the president yet. My question is there 2 or 3 places in our district that we can just choose? I feel like if we go with the FDR drives are going to be a little harder. Maybe I'm wrong by saying that, but I think it's going to be a little harder to get those to be open streets off the bat. Is there 1, 2, or 3 of these that we can actually start really, asking our council and maybe Mark Levine and saying, these are what we would like this summer to be open streets. Can we get these to happen sooner than later? And just go with a couple of them first?
So yeah, I encountered a lot of this with the budget committee, and it's a sort of the fallacy of the focused effort. It's that if we ask for 10 things and none of the 10 get done, that we might have more success asking for 3 of them. And what'll happen is then it'll actually improve city statistics that there are fewer things that they left unattended because they don't get any of the 3 done either. So I think the format of this particular request makes it irrelevant. We could choose on our own to communicate that focus without needing to pass new legislation. It is helpful to know that members of the community feel like, oh, if we got 3 of these, actually that would be pretty happy. If the 3 of them didn't include the FDR, well, that makes more sense because it's more connected, and the FDR is the farthest thing away from it. Though it's all super helpful to know. And, it is actually very reasonable, and we can engage with that in mind, that the FDR, anything that's the most disconnected is a stretch goal. Anything that's the closest to the route and gives you the most access to the most useful things and increases the effectiveness of the program makes the most sense to focus on, especially if budget or staffing is any sort of limitation. So we'll certainly look into that, and that's all super helpful and all on the record on YouTube in perpetuity. And with that, we will wrap up discussion on this agenda item. We'll move on to agenda item number 2, which is on my sheet, discussion on New York City Council Intro 501A 2022 regarding hazardous obstruction by vehicles and civilian complaints for hazardous obstruction violations. There is a resolution that Jason submitted. I'll give you the floor in a second to explain what's in the reso. This is a revisitation of something that we discussed recently. I mentioned it in full board. 501A is a replacement for Intro 501, which we discussed. We filed a resolution in support of with conditions, and which passed full board earlier this year. The original intro now has been replaced by this one, which removes. I think for the purposes of being the chair of a transportation committee and doing a governmental function, I don't like using the terms watered down. 501A restructures the original Intro 501 to sort of put greater limits on who in what circumstances can do the reporting, and the laws that can be enforced and what conditions under which they can be enforced. I think that's pretty much it. It takes out the Intro 501 thing where people were going to potentially receive financial compensation or a reward for reporting some of the incidents. Now there will not be that in this particular intro. In any case, we did invite Councilmember Ressler and or his office to our committee. We were told that we could talk to our local council members to see what they had to say, which was essentially sending us in a circle because our council members said they didn't really understand what was in this and they didn't want to come discuss it. They're generally in support of it, but they didn't want to get into a discussion of why there were changes because they didn't understand that very well. And the changes kind of emerged from Councilmember Ressler's office. So since then, Councilmember Ressler has spoken publicly about it, and he has essentially said, I've made changes to this to get more support for it. We now have more partners, and we feel very good about it passing, and we want it to pass. And we're disappointed about the things that were taken out, but life is life, and we're taking a first step. Okay, so Jason, take it away.
Thank you. The resolution basically repurposed the original resolution with a couple of additions. The first one is basically acknowledging that what Brian had said, that there were compromises that were made in order to get this bill passed in the city council. And while we preferred the original bill, we see the urgent need for this program and would like to still see it passed. And I also added there was a city council hearing on this where the NYPD were asked if to address concerns that have been raised on violence against reporters. The NYPD were asked if they were aware of conflicts between drivers and civilian reporters in the commercial vehicle idling program, which the response was that they were not aware of any of conflicts occurring in that. And I included what we passed in the original resolution for asking for an exception to be added for type class 2 bike lanes and one thing that I also added is the final, albeit for the resolved. One thing that they changed in the program as a part of 501 to 501A is they introduced a 3-year phase-in of the bill. So the initially, I believe it will only apply to Lower Manhattan, and then over 3 years expand to other parts of the city. I believe our district would be included in the program until year 3. So the last further resolved requests that phase-in is removed, given the need for it more urgently in Community Board 6.
And so just a quick question from me, the resolved about the exception for class 2 conventional bike lanes, is that just an echo of what was in the original resolution about that exception?
So, well, I included what we had in the original.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, I just straight copied that from the previously approved resolution.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. B, I see you have your hand raised, but you were beaten to the punch by Larry, who has been contacting me by several methods today, who wants to discuss what he shared earlier in the chat. Larry, are you good with cutting and pasting that text again with the amendment that you had written?
I've put it in the chat.
Yeah, it went in at 7:04 p.m. I would suggest that you paste it again and reread it for our benefit, and then I'll get to B. I'll get to you after we have a quick sidebar about this.
Okay. Well, let B have the floor while I'm mechanically doing this.
Okay, B. I'll call on you.
Thank you, Brian. I actually support this resolution, but I have one problem with it, and that's having implemented many legislative programs. I understand why they're asking for a 3-year phase-in, okay? By us eliminating the 3-year phase-in and asking for it to be done immediately, I find is unrealistic for any citywide program. So I would actually like some modification of that language. So I will wait, Brian, for Larry to do his thing, and then we could come back about the 3-year or something that says to be done in less than, and we put a year in there. You can't do this initially over the whole city. It's going to be impossible.
Let's scroll down to that. There's something about implementing it, like a quick about the phase in.
Yeah, the phase in, it says, and it's actually has it from the bill, where, let me go to the last resolve. It's the last resolve. And
Okay,
it's,
on the
we're
screen now.
asking to remove the gradual 3-year phase-in period of the program and implement the reporting program citywide initially, given the urgent need. It's going to be impossible to do a whole citywide initially, and I don't know what initially means. So I want to try to deal with putting in less than X to get this done, but you have to give implementation time. It's going to take operational resources to do it.
Is that concern in like staffing and like the volume of reports?
Yeah, staffing, the volume of reports, to work out the process that they actually use, to work out the digital aspects of it. I think they have a lot to do. And even though they've had this with some, other kinds of vehicles, this is greater volume, and we want this to work right. And I've been involved with too many national programs that we've rushed, and they have failed at the beginning, and that stays with you throughout the whole thing. And this will be a sensitive program anyway. So I just think we have to be careful.
Let me just ask a quick question of you, B. Just taking like a ballpark guess, would it be amenable for us to say that we'd prefer a 1-year phase-in than a 3-year phase-in?
Yeah, I would go with the 1 year, because then that's a negotiating point, as opposed to initially.
Yeah, and I imagine that one thing I'm just going to throw out there for a little bit of context is that if no matter what happens with this legislation, like it would not be effective at the stroke of the pen of it being whatever, but it would probably have some future effective date that would be months ahead. That would have to, and it would also probably have to include some budgeting and considerations with that. But that said, it does seem like it seems like that there will, no matter what happens, it can't be everything happens on day one kind of thing. But I can actually see the reasoning behind the start date of the program being slightly set back, but it being very broad, or a much wider swath of the city that they're initially proposing, and then with a full phase in within 6 months to a year of the initial start date. As much volume as it'll be generated, it'll also be a lot of automation, and it'll be a lot of technology stuff that once they have it in place, it'll be able to handle the volume with just a little bit more testing and scaling. But that's none of my business what they have to do.
I was going to say, I'm not going to plan their operations, but that it's going to take technology, operational, and the resources. And I agree with you. It's never affected on enactment. It usually reads within X of enactment. So that is why I thought the initial phrase was not really appropriate.
So when we're finished discussing what Larry has on deck, we'll come back to you and we'll have an actual. Sounds like you want to make a motion, so I'll give you a little bit of time to form that, and you can put something written in your notes in the chat when we get to that point. That would probably help us, and we'll recite it out loud. So speaking of which, Larry, you have pasted something in the chat. I would like you to read it. You're going to make a motion?
Yes. This intro 501A creates an additional mechanism for remedying the hazardous illegal traffic obstructions that put bicyclists and pedestrians at risk of death and serious injury.
Larry, I have a point of order for you, and I'm trying to help here. If you have to, if you want to make a motion, you have to make a motion. You can't start debating first, or else I can't actually call on you. Or the motion doesn't. The motion isn't effective because parliamentary. You have to make the motion.
All right. I just wanted to provide some context for the motion that I put into the chat.
Yeah, you have to read. You have to read it out loud according to our rules.
I move to amend the resolution as follows. First, insert a new whereas following the second, the original second whereas clause. Whereas intro 501A fails to mention the blocking of bus stops. which must be cleared if a bus approaches. Second, modify the original fourth whereas to substitute quote unquote parking tickets for quote unquote fines. Third, make the fourth original whereas the last whereas. Fourth, delete the third original resolved and substitute for it, quote, be it further resolved that Manhattan Community Board 6 also requests the New York City Council study how it could revise its traffic rules in order to safely and legally accommodate accessible pickups and drop-offs on narrow streets where conventional bicycle lanes, non-share of class 2, are present and there is no space to pull in to the curb. So I finished
Okay,
reading it.
so for one thing, let's take a quick look at these edits again.
The first two are more in the nature of factual corrections. And the first time we went at the resolution, I remember having requested that there be a provision with respect to bus stops, which was left out of the legislation and which caused me to object to the legislation unless it was provided for. We didn't word the resolution quite like that, though. And here on Jason's rewrite, there's no mention of the bus stops being left out of the legislation. And so that's why I proposed my first amendment.
I would just quickly address that. It is included in the second further resolve. Sorry,
Yeah,
No,
there's
no, the
like-
whereas, the
I see.
whereas.
Yeah, no,
the
go if you scroll
explanation.
up. Yeah, we're working on this live, so now I'm loading the resolution that was mailed around, and it's
the second
second
yeah,
whereas
the
does
first
now say
be it
bus
further
lanes.
resolved on the second page says Manhattan
No,
Community.
no, I understand. That's fine. That's fine. I'm just trying to create, the corresponding whereas for that.
Okay, yeah.
Why are we adding this?
Got it.
So for the purposes of this discussion and debate, given what people have been saying and given how this was presented, I appreciate everybody sticking to formal parliamentary rules up to this point. I'm going to consider this as sort of like a thing that we're kind of brainstorming along the way. So let's just kind of free flow, add and subtract to it. But I do want to discuss these particular edits outside of the parliamentary context, but in a constructive way where we can get some, consensus here. So Larry's first suggested modification of a whereas adds bus stops to the whereas sections. I don't think that that's a major change to this resolution. Jason, do you agree with me on that?
Yeah, I agree. Although perhaps it could be clarified about the must be clear, just to be like clear exactly what the intent is there. Like that it's critical for it to be clear so that passengers can unload and load safely or something along those lines.
In the whereas section or down?
Yeah, for the whereas, like at the final, at the end, which must be cleared if a bus approaches, just to like.
Let me just
I don't know,
take
I
a
feel like
quick
that's
look
sort
at
of
this.
vague. What does that mean exactly? Like, feel free to disagree with me.
I'm trying to see where's the yeah, so Larry wants to add a whereas that chides the city because 501A doesn't mention the blocking of bus stops. I'm going to make an executive decision and we're not going to include that. modification, just because we are asking for them to make that modification.
But there's no rationale for it. And nobody knows, except those who've read this proposed law closely, that this is a serious omission in the drafting.
Why is it a omission in the drafting of 501A?
Right.
Okay,
was
yeah, we
left
don't
out
need
of
to, we don't
501,
need, that doesn't need
And
to
then,
be
and
in our
it was left
resolution.
out of 501, and then it was left out of 501A. And there's never been any reason provided for why this, of all the items that they mentioned, was left out. And,
This
and
need,
James had come to us with his own experience of which he's shared with us in previous meetings of why this is really important to cover. and to explain.
we agree it's important. That's why there's a resolved covering it. I think that's what covers it. And I feel like this language is not clear why this is in a whereas. It's not what the whereas section is for in a resolution.
Well, what is the whereas section for?
So we're setting the stage of the general topic. I think it's a little too weedy for that. But we are asking for it to be
Because the
expanded to bus
first,
stops.
I'm sorry, because the current second whereas lists it, but that's not in the legislation.
It's not in the legislation, but we already listed it as it's important. It's part of the list of important things. I think it's covered. That's why.
All right.
Second,
right.
modify the original fourth whereas to substitute parking tickets for fines.
Because the transportation.
Yeah, that's already
department-
been applied. I like that. Jason, do you like that?
Support.
I think we're all good on that. Third, make the fourth original whereas the last whereas, which is proposed bill intro 501 would create a program. Did we already make that move?
No, we did not. So if the committee wants it, we can make that move.
I think it still needs to go before the one that I think it makes most sense where it's third from the end, where it goes before the mention of 501, the original 501, and before the mention of the transpo chief. Does that seem to make sense? It seems weird to drop in mention of 501A after we're already talking about other stuff that's situationally relevant to 501A. And that's my only commentary on that third point.
Brian, that's really an editorial kind of a call. And that's
Jason, what do you
why I made
think?
the suggestion.
I'm fine moving it.
Yeah, so just move it 2 slots down and that should be fine.
All right, let's make that change before we move on.
I think that we are, let me see. Larry wants the exception for the class 2 conventional bike lanes. I think we should talk about that as a separate thing. But I think that regardless of how we move forward, we should incorporate the be it further resolved about study how it could revise its traffic rules to order safely, legally, and legally accommodate accessible pickups and drop-offs on narrow streets where conventional bicycle lanes are present and there's no space to pull the curb. I think that should be in there. And Jason, it's fine. It's just, we didn't ask for that in the first one. And I think the committee would be amenable to that. I think that should be in there, but the issue of making the exception for the class 2 conventional bike lanes, I think so Larry's saying that if there is a painted non-sharrow bike lane on a street, there should not be an exception regardless of what the drop-off zone situation is on the street, that this legislation should allow users to submit violations for fines to be issued. Our original discussion on this, we had consensus that we wanted an amendment that it excused class two bike lanes simply because there was the trend on most side streets where these bike lanes exist was that there was nowhere to pull off, and that this was going to create an untenable situation. All I can do is offer a voice vote at this time, unless anybody wants to bring up debate points.
The other rationale.
Larry, don't cut me off, Larry.
Sorry.
If we have anybody else who wants to make specific points on us having a voice vote on whether to include that particular whereas again, I will, everybody currently who has a talking point, lower your hands and then re-raise your hands if you want to speak specifically to that. And I will give you each 2 minutes, and then we're going to have a voice vote on whether we include that or not. And this is about specifically the be it further resolved that Manhattan Community Board 6 also urges the council to make an exception for class 2 conventional bike lanes. So now is when we would talk about that. And Majed, I knew you were the one of the people who initiated the discussion on this. So I would like it if you gave your point of view on that again. But I will call Larry first, then Majed, and then if anybody else wants to speak specifically to this, get your hand raised now.
Well, I'll let Majed and Michael speak because I'd like to be able to respond.
Okay, Majed, you want to go first?
Yeah, my view on this has been that we don't want to create a setup where we're setting folks to fail. If the city, just the design of the street does not allow them to have drop-offs, does not mean they should be penalized. That's why I think this should be included. So I'm still in favor of keeping this. We're not trying to trick folks. We're just trying to get, better compliance on the road and not create a loophole where folks just end up getting tickets against their will.
Okay. Does anyone else want to raise their hand? Michael, do you want to comment on this?
I want to comment about a different point. So should I save that?
If you want to comment about this specifically, here's your chance to do it. I will call on you for the later point too. But if you have anything to add to this, go right ahead right now.
So hold on, to this resolution or this point in the resolution?
To that point.
No, I don't have anything to comment on.
Okay. Larry, you're next, then Jason, and then I'm closing debate. We're going to have a voice vote on it. Go ahead,
Okay.
Larry.
Okay, thank you. There already exists a mechanism for civilian reporting of this illegality to 311 and 911, but it's wholly ineffective, except when the vehicle being reported was licensed by the Taxi and Limousine Commission. Now, I've experience with this in making reports, and the facts are situationally related to the details that could be very much clarified by a photograph. There is currently no mechanism for me to submit a photograph except if TLC calls me up and says, do you have a photograph that can help us to make the case? And I've done that. And I've also explained the context, such as where the vehicle is parked in the bike lane and there's space at the curb, and the vehicle didn't even attempt to park to get out of the way. Now, stopping in a designated bike lane, and we're not talking about parking, we're not talking about standing, we're talking about stopping, is completely prohibited and subject to fine under state law. And that said, someone who's ticketed for this violation will not lose their freedom. They will not get points put on their license, nor will they be penalized by having their insurance premiums hiked. They do, however, have to make a decision if they're going to violate this law, whether to take the risk of being caught. The only thing that this intro does is it improves the odds of their being caught in doing something that puts cyclists at great risk of death and personal injury, because someone parked in the bike lane creates a sight line that's blocked where the bicyclists cannot be seen as they pull out into traffic if they're between two cars on that block that are in the bike lane. There are.
Now, Larry, I
travel
have
too
to
fast.
stop you there because you're well over 2 minutes.
Okay.
I think the general point is that the bike lanes serve a vital purpose, that that there is some level of necessity to cars staying out of those lanes, and that we need to find any potential avenue which we can find to keep that enforcement up. That is a very good, relevant point, which a lot of people in the district hold. So I don't want that to not be out there. Jason, I'm going to call on you, and then we're going to have a voice vote on whether to include this or not.
So I definitely prefer Larry's version and support the addition here. I think it's worth calling out. We this sort of was fairly rushed discussion in when this came up in the full board, but I think it is worth calling out that I believe, as Larry pointed out, it is illegal to stop in the bike lane. I don't believe there is. We talked about this in full board, that whether or not it was legal to stop in the lane of traffic. I don't believe that is the case, and I still
It is the
maintain
case.
That's
It is the case.
It is the case that it would be illegal to stop in the travel lane.
Yes.
Yeah, I think stopping in a travel lane is just simply not like a traffic allowable thing.
Yeah, and it's in the statute.
Okay.
We violate it so much it doesn't seem like it could be real, but it's. And I think in any other town in America, if you just stopped in the middle of the street and walked away from your car, there would be consequences.
Fair enough. I don't know. I guess in the interest of or in the same vein of Larry Ressler's, not Larry Ressler, sorry, I'm
Lincoln Ressler.
Thank you. Of making compromises to have this passed, that is why I left the original whereas in there. If that's the sticking point, I'd like to see this passed regardless, but I do prefer Larry's version.
Well, I'm only proposing to change the resolved, and the original whereas the rationale is, I think, solid.
And I think this is why we needed a voice vote on this, is because it is a genuinely controversial point in which both sides have really good points for people who are in the district. And let's proceed to that. So you guys in the office, we want a raised hands votes who supports including the whereas about excluding the resolved about the removing the class 2 conventional bike lanes. Who supports keeping that resolved in the resolution, and then a separate show of hands of who supports taking it out?
Okay, and you want this by a show of hands?
Show of hands, please.
Okay, might it not be more efficient just to ask one question or the other? Do you support removing this resolve right here that's crossed out and including and replacing it with this one? And then whoever raises their hand, yes, majority goes.
We unconditionally want the second one, because it is irrelevant whether the first one prevails, that we want that statement to be made to the city that it actually should do that, period.
Okay, all right, so let's do it your way then. What is that first question you want?
The show of hands who supports retaining that resolved, and show of hands of who is in favor of removing it.
Okay, who supports on this committee supports removing the resolve that reads, be it further resolved that Manhattan Community Board 6 also urges the New York City Council to make an exception for Class 2 conventional bike lanes. Raise your hand if you support removing this resolved clause. I'll give it a few more seconds for people to get their Zoom in order. Okay, we have 8 Zoom hands, and that is a clear majority of the committee. So this will be removed. Going once, going twice, gone. All right, everyone Zoom hands, please put them down.
Okay, so B, you're up next with your suggestion about the phase-in.
We never did your second question, which, do you support putting in this?
Oh, we're including that regardless.
Oh, okay, well then, that's that. But there was some of the other ones, we got a little bit, there were so many, we got a little bit lost.
Yeah,
so-
I think that's the only one where we really needed to pull the committee. I think everything else is pretty straightforward.
Okay, so just to be clear, we are changing, we are taking fines out, and we are putting parking tickets in this whereas right here. So
Yeah, I'm assuming that that's fine, that there's no objection to that. If
okay.
anyone objects, say it now.
All right, I see Brian Van Nieuwenhoven and Michael Devereaux.
I have to put my hand down, sorry.
Okay, all right, so that's not an objection. Okay, this was already dealt with. And
And
okay,
then
it was
we-
this one, the fourth original whereas, which is 1, 2, 3, this one right here. What were you saying? Move it down 2
Slide that
spots?
2 spots, yeah.
All right.
Perfect.
Okay, so now
So
it
now
looks,
we're ready for B.
okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna go to the language that exists now and show you what to substitute. So be it further resolved that Manhattan Community Board 6 also urges New York City to, and this is where I'm giving you new language, implement the program citywide within 1 year of enactment. And then I'm going to the phrase, given the urgent need to reduce illegal parking and to protect pedestrians and bicyclists citywide and in Community Board 6, rather than the 3-year phase-in as exists right now in the bill.
All right, that was a bit fast.
And you can also paste that in the webinar chat.
Here's what I have so far. You're probably gonna have to read it again more slowly. I have that Manhattan Community Board 6 also urges New York City Council to, and that was already there.
Right,
And then
implement the
implement
program
the program citywide
Right.
within
in
1
1 year
year.
of enactment,
Mhm.
given the urgent need, jump down to where you have the language,
Given the urgent need
to reduce illegal parking and to protect pedestrians and bicyclists citywide and in Manhattan Community Board 6, rather than the 3-year implementation process that's in the law.
All right, given the urgent need to reduce illegal parking and protect bicyclists and pedestrians. Continue reading.
And citywide and in Manhattan Community Board 6.
Community District 6.
Rather
Uh-huh.
than the 3-year implementation, phased implementation that exists in the bill. Period.
And then the rest of it would be
Is
removed.
out. Yep.
Okay. All right, so it would now read, be it further resolved that Manhattan Community Board 6 also urges New York City Council to implement the program citywide within 1 year of enactment, given the urgent need to reduce illegal parking and to protect bicyclists and pedestrians citywide and in Manhattan Community District 6 rather than the 3-year phased-in implementation that exists in the bill.
Right, and you're gonna take away the rest.
Okay,
Thank you.
My feeling is that this is going to be agreeable to the entire committee. If there is any objection to this change being made to the resolution, please raise your hand now. Other than Michael, who I will call on for the point that he wants to make after we're done discussing this. Any objections? Seeing no objections, we should adopt this language in the written resolution, and then I will call on Michael, and then we will close debate on this. Go ahead, Mike.
All right, thank you, Brian. I'd like to make a motion to remove let me just get it right for a second. The part about where is it now? I'm trying to find it. About the violence the conflict between oh yeah. Whereas during the hearing in front of New York City Council on April 24, 2023, NYPD Transportation Bureau Chief Kim Royster said she is not aware of issues of conflict between drivers and civilian reporters in similar commercial vehicle idling enforcement program. I feel like that's misleading. I think her whole quote was, I'm not saying that it may not happen, but she is not aware. And then another NYPD chief said that there was articles about it. And I believe Lincoln actually asked about the TLC program, not the commercial driving license drivers, because he states the TLC, if there's any conflict between TLC and TLC are different than the commercial driving. So I think this point is untrue, and I think it should be removed.
No objection on my end to removing.
Okay, Jason, state your objection to its removal.
I don't have any objection.
Or you don't have any objection?
No, it's fine.
So my feeling in terms of resolution construction is that I think it's good for all of us to know that that stuff was said on the record by these various leaders. That it is relevant to the debate that's being held about transportation in our city, that suddenly we're introducing a technological enforcement measure, and we're all of a sudden talking about this is going to lead to fistfights between citizens on the street. And it just seems absurd on the face from a leadership perspective to talk about that being some sort of priority with enforcing the law and whatnot, especially when there's no evidence of that happening with any of the other programs that rely on the same technology. And so I do encourage everyone on the committee to take a broader look at the situation, read articles about 501A to see some of the perspectives that have been shared about this, including the patently absurd resistance that certain people from certain quarters are putting in place to try to stop this from happening. I do think that this program would be beneficial to the district. I think such objections are irrelevant and nonsensical. And that said, I think we can safely delete that whereas, because it is sort of like non sequitur. It just kind of comes out of nowhere. It is not really relevant to the relevance of the actual intro. But I can see why it would seem like a point to bring up.
I get it, Brian.
Jason, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, perhaps we could revise it and like remove the direct quote, but make the point that whereas the commercial idling enforcement program has been successful and without major incidents of violence or something along those lines.
I would say add on the TLC enforcement, and
Yeah.
you got yourself a winner. Let's see about this phrasing where, what was it? Whereas this type of enforcement is currently used in the commercial vehicle Billy idling program. The commercial
doesn't
vehicle
idle.
idling program. Don't mind me, I'm being silly.
I think Billy doesn't idle or something.
Billy
like
doesn't
Yeah,
idle.
that's what it is. Billy doesn't idle. You know what, Brian, what agency is going to take care of the tickets of this? The tickets, what's the agency?
The Business Integrity Commission.
On a serious point, it's going to be, I just want to
Oh,
say.
it's going to
that
be a closet in 250 Broadway.
It's been like with the DEP, they've been so overwhelmed with the commercial idling. And listen, I'm in that industry, and if you idle, that's it. You get a ticket. But idling tickets have been coming from like 2 years ago because they're so overwhelmed. So I can just see when this hits the general public, and it's not, commercial businesses, it's the general public, and they're getting tickets an hour, a year and a half later because of this. I just hope that whatever agency it is prepared for the volume it's going to have, and is, prepared for the public, wanting an efficient, speedy ticket to handle. And that's just my hope of this.
I mean, my expectation is hopefully they can get something like this implemented without a major HR system scandal, corruption, without paying some company from Alaska $300 million for literally no software. Gabe and then Larry.
Okay, thank you. Just very quickly in a public forum, I just want to state, I don't believe that somebody behaving violently in the face of enforcement is actually a strong case against said enforcement. And I just want to push back against that framing. That's all.
Agreed. Larry, you're next, and then I'll, guys in the office, I'll tell you, we'll update on the language for that whereas.
Okay, I attended a meeting in which someone who works in the as a lawyer in the transportation industry, who's vehemently opposed to what he calls vigilante enforcement, indicated there are only about 5 people who've regularly submitted videos relating to the Billy Doesn't Idle campaign.
Yeah, there's some indication that program might be severely mismanaged, but we'll see about it. So that final
that's
whereas should read something along the lines, did Michael or Jason have the language that whereas existing enforcement from under...
Bernard, just drop something in the chat.
Yeah, just drop something. Okay.
We're picking it up from the chat.
Yeah, unless anyone has critical edits to those whereases, I think they'll be fine. And just and delete the whereas with the Kim Royster quote in the link.
Okay, we delete this whole whereas.
Yeah, and replace it with these.
2 of them.
Yes, please.
Okay, so now that previous whereas was deleted, that had the quote, and it's now replaced with whereas a similar civilian reporting program exists for enforcing commercial vehicle idling and reporting of illegal parking and driving to the TLC. Whereas there have been no major instances of violence in the aforementioned programs.
I would just, the first whereas programs exist, and get rid of the A at the beginning.
I also might suggest spelling out Taxi and Limousine Commission, even though I'm the one who wrote this.
Okay, so get rid of the A.
And make sure programs in that other one.
Oh,
Programs exist.
there we go. Subject verb agreement error corrected.
And Taxi and Limousine Commission. With that said, does anyone have a motion?
Quickly, on the whereas you're working on there, perhaps deleting the word of on this line.
Yeah, just get rid of the of right after reporting. Okay. Do I see anyone with a motion?
Yes, I
Please.
do, Brian. Move the resolution for a vote.
Majed?
Second.
We'll proceed to a vote.
Thank you.
Oop. Stop share screen.
Sorry. We'll now take a vote on the resolution in support of intro 501A 2022 by roll call. When your name is called for your vote, you can unmute yourself and answer in favor, opposed, abstain, or not entitled. Majed Abdul Samad,
In favor.
thank you. Michael Devereaux,
In favor?
thank you. B. Disman,
In favor?
thank you. Jason Fromowitz,
Favor?
thank you. Matt Roberts,
In favor.
thank you. Larry Shire,
In favor?
thank you. Gabe Terzo,
In favor?
thank you. Brian Van Nieuwenhoven,
In favor?
thank you. Ronnie White is not present. James Wilson,
In favor.
thank you. With 9 in favor, the motion passes.
Thank you, thank you. Now, we'll move the agenda to item number 4. Oh, no, item number 3. I misread my sheet. Discussion of defaced and obstructed license plate enforcement penalties. We have a resolution that Jason drafted. We will need it screen shared.
Mhm. One moment, please.
While we're waiting for the resolution to come up, just a housekeeping thing. Brian, did you receive any written notice from Ronnie that she would not be attending tonight?
No.
Okay, thank you.
And everybody got a copy of this before the meeting?
These 2 resolutions were sent out to the committee Friday afternoon.
So, yeah, just let's display them for a short amount of time. We'll scroll down to the second half of this one. And let's get both of those resolves on there. Therefore, be it resolved that Manhattan Community Board 6 urges the New York City Council to pass legislation to increase the penalty for vehicles parked and operated with missing, fraudulent, obstructed, or defaced license plates. And be it further resolved that Manhattan Community Board 6 urges the New York City Council to pass legislation to require mandatory impoundment of vehicles parked and operated with missing, fraudulent, obstructed, or defaced license plates. And there's one more. Be it further resolved that Manhattan Community Board 6 urges New York Police Department to increase enforcement of current regulations against vehicles with missing, fraudulent, obstructed, or defaced license plates. Does anyone want to debate the resolution as it is on the floor? Larry?
I think that, Jason, you did a terrific job here, but I do want to ask you a question. And that is that the Department of Motor Vehicles has jurisdiction over license plates. Is there any reason why state law is not mentioned here at all?
I believe I did address state law in the middle, one of the middle whereas clauses that the
Yeah, okay.
traffic law, section 402, is what cites the law around operating a vehicle. My understanding, and I'm not a lawyer, is that the way the law is set up is that the state regulates the operation of the vehicles and has a law that prohibits the operation of the vehicles from being driven with, requires vehicles to be driven with a valid license plate. And then the city has a law that requires parked vehicles within the city, a separate law that requires parked vehicles to display a valid license plate. So I did cite the state law basically I cited both those things. And I stated the penalty set at the statutorily on the state law, as well as the Department of Finance's the fine schedule for this offense, which is currently at $65.
Is there anything that we know of with regard to suspending the license of a driver who operates such a vehicle?
I am not aware of that as a penalty, although
Yeah, I would say given where we're at in this meeting and with this discussion, we should table that and revisit like at another meeting if we find additional evidence that we would support something in regards to making a recommendation. Because we can always have another resolution at a future meeting. I'll call on B next.
I'd like to move the question.
Michael?
One thing I wanted to see if we could add in there. NYPD, including traffic agents too, to give the traffic agents, I don't know if they're allowed to ticket right now, but to give them the power, I guess, to ticket parked cars. That's one question I have. Are they allowed to right now? And if not, I'd love to see them have the authority to do so.
Well, for one, NYPD says that traffic agents tend to get into fights with residents over enforcing traffic laws. But second, no, they don't have that power now. We could address that in a separate forum, but because they broadly don't have the power, I think that is like a perfect is the enemy of the good kind of thing for this reso.
are you sure about that in terms of for parked vehicles? Because I think this
yeah, traffic. So yeah, the walking TEAs. I thought you meant the traffic directing TEAs. They don't give tickets. I think that we don't need to put anything separate about that power because I think they can already ticket for parking violations. So I think, and listen, I have colloquially heard through news reports and people discussing that, that traffic enforcement agents can face serious interdepartmental consequences for writing tickets on cars that are around precincts that are parked without registrations or with bent license plates or whatnot. I have no personal witness to any such incidents, but I'm hearing that is a reason why TEAs are very reluctant to enforce that because they don't know whose car they might actually write the ticket on. That also goes for a certain type of corruption across city agencies and whether a politician or a high-ranking official in a different agency might exert that kind of pressure. It sounds positively wicked and we need to push back on that sort of thing, and we should probably mention that to the council members. I don't know if that has clean language in this resolution, but we could, I would maybe, we're about to vote on it anyway, so.
You need a second on my movement.
Yeah, B's move is still out there if someone wants to second it.
I second it.
Okay, so we'll move the question on the resolution and that will bring us to a vote on it, whether we want to adopt this as is. If you have a meaningful resolution or meaningful amendment that has not been considered, I apologize. We can revisit additional resolutions in future meetings. Keep a pause on that and work on the language offline. Guys, we're ready for a vote on this.
Thank you. We'll now take your vote on a resolution to increase penalties and enforcement on vehicles that are operated with missing, fraudulent, obstructed, and defaced license plates. Screen share. When your name is called for your vote, you can unmute yourself and answer in favor, opposed, abstain, or not entitled. Majed Abdul Samad,
In favor.
thank you. Michael Devereaux,
In favor.
thank you. B. Disman,
In favor.
thank you. Jason Fromowitz,
Favor?
thank you. Matt Roberts,
In favor.
thank you. Larry Shire,
In favor.
thank you. Gabe Terzo,
In favor.
thank you. Brian Van Nieuwenhoven,
In favor.
thank you. Bonnie White is not with us this meeting. James Wilson,
In favor.
thank you. With 9 in favor, the motion passes.
All right, thank you, everyone. I know this is a lot of debate, long debate tonight. We're near the finish line. Agenda item number 4, report from NYC DOT. Colleen?
Hey, Brian, sorry, I was just tapping onto my unmute. How are you guys
No
doing?
problem.
I don't have much to report this evening, unless if you guys have anything you wanted to give me. I will take back the issue with the open street. I'll find out what happened there. Because I know we did extend the route and it was further north, but it was not in CB6 district as what the board had read out the locations. So I will take that back and I'll discuss it with Borough Commissioner Pinkar.
Okay, great. And nothing else other than I will, we typically go on a summer break in July and August. So I will prompt the committee to bring up any issues that might be outstanding and to reach down deep to think about anything going into June so that you have it
Perfect.
to address over the summer. Any curb cuts that need to be remedied, any pooling, any street side issues. We haven't brought that kind of stuff up in a while,
Mhm.
but okay. Thank you for sticking through all of this.
Yes, you're
Chair's report.
Can I
I'm
ask
going
a
to waive it.
Question for Colleen. real quick?
Oh, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Colleen, I just wanted to ask if there was any update on the resolution we passed a couple months ago on adding physical barriers to the pedestrian refuge areas on Second Avenue that are currently painted.
let me get back to you on that because I have to pull the resolution. I know it was a sign. I'll pull that and I'll get back to the board. I'll get back to Jesus in the morning.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If no one else has questions for Colleen, I'm going to waive my chair's report and I will give any report that I have during full board next week. Final agenda item, old or new business. Does anyone have anything to bring up during old new business? Seeing no one raising anything, do I see a motion to adjourn? Majed?
Motion to adjourn.
Larry?
Second.
All right, at 8:36 p.m., we are donezo. Meeting adjourned. All
Thank
right,
you.
thanks, guys. Very productive. Very proud of all of you.
Have a good night.
Have a
Good night. See everyone soon.
Night.
Good night all.